Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavater Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Sranvata Svakatha Krishna Punyashravana Kirtanaha Hridayantastoya Padhrani Vidanoti Surutsatam. Hare Krishna. So, continuing the series of glorification of Srimad Bhagavatam on account of celebrating Bhadra Purnima recently, we'll continue the discussion. For today, we will be discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam, the final chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Glories of Srimad Bhagavatam himself, from Canto 12, Chapter 13. We'll be taking the cue from verse 18 and then discussing the presentation of Srimad Bhagavatam and his glories. So the verse, again, Canto 12, Chapter 13, verse 18. So the verse goes like this. Srimad Bhagavatam Puranam Amalam Yad Vaishnavanam Priyam Yasmin Parahamsyamekam Amalam Gnanam Param Giyate Tatra Gnana Viraga Bhakti Sahitam Naishkarmyam Avishkritam Tachrunvansu Patan Vicharana Paro Bhaktya Vimuchyennaraha. Once again. Srimad Bhagavatam Puranam Amalam Yad Vaishnavanam Priyam Yasmin Paramahamsyam Ekam Amalam Jnanam Param Giyate Tatra Gnana Viraga Bhakti Saitam Naishkarmyam Avishkritam Tachrunvansu Patan Vicharana Paro Bhaktya Vimuchyennaraha. Synonyms: Srimad Bhagavatam, Puranam, the Purana, Amalam, perfectly pure, Yat, which, Vaishnavanam, to the Vaishnavas, Priyam, most dear, Yasmin, in which, Paramahamsyam, attainable by the topmost devotees, Ekam, exclusive, Amalam, perfectly pure, Gnanam, knowledge, Param, supreme, Giyate is sung, Tatra, there, Gnana Viraga Bhakti Sahitam, together with knowledge, renunciation, and devotion. Naishkarmyam, freedom from all material work. Avishkritam is revealed, Tat, that. Shrunvan, hearing. Supatan, properly chanting. Vicharana Paraha, who is serious about understanding. Bhaktya, with devotion. Vimuchyet, becomes totally liberated. Naraha, a person. Translation and purport by disciples of Srila Prabhupada. This is Evangelist Abhay Navarinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Keep check. Translation. Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana. It is most dear to the Vaishnavas because it describes the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. This Bhagavatam reveals the means for becoming free from all material work, together with the process of transcendental knowledge, renunciation, and devotion. Anyone who seriously tries to understand Srimad Bhagavatam, who properly hears and chants it with devotion, becomes completely liberated. Purport. Because Srimad Bhagavatam is completely free of contamination by the modes of nature, it is endowed with extraordinary spiritual beauty and is therefore dear to the pure devotees of the Lord. The word Paramahamsyam indicates that even completely liberated souls are eager to hear and narrate Srimad Bhagavatam. Those who are trying to be liberated should faithfully serve this literature by hearing and reciting with faith and devotion. Let's once again we read the translation and then we'll offer some prayers and have some discussion. Translation. Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana. It is the most dear to the Vaishnavas because it describes the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. This Bhagavatam reveals the means for becoming free from all material work, together with the process of transcendental knowledge, renunciation, and devotion. Anyone who seriously tries to understand Srimad Bhagavatam, who properly hears and chants it with devotion becomes completely liberated. Let's offer some prayers and then we'll have some discussion. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Once again, thank you for joining, and blessed to have this opportunity once again as part of this series to glorify Srimad Bhagavatam and thereby learn the lessons for our own personal reading and just having that kind of going deep into our own appreciation of Srimad Bhagavatam, especially for me. So in continuation of kind of the sequence of glorification of Srimad Bhagavatam, last time when we had the discussion as part of the Srimad Bhagavatam class that I was giving, we discussed one aspect of the gift of Srimad Bhagavatam, how Srimad Bhagavatam kind of motivates us and gives that impetus irrespective of what kind of motivation we have in our devotional service, whether it be the Guru Nishtha or Sadhu Sangha or reading or chanting or Kirtan or just the deity worship. Srimad Bhagavatam is kind of has aspects around that, and also discussed how every section of Srimad Bhagavatam is relatable. So today I wanted to discuss from a slightly different perspective on a different gift of Srimad Bhagavatam, and taking this one as a kind of as the basis for that. And before we get into the discussion, a couple of things that I wanted to just present was that, so the basis in some regards for the discussion that we're going to have is of understanding that Supreme Lord Sri Krishna is the absolute truth. That's kind of because we are with those understanding that we all have, at least to some degree, have that conviction and faith that Shri Radha Shyamsundar are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are the divine couple. And for them, with also that understanding that for Shri Radha Shyamsundar, somebody who serves their devotees are much more favorable, and they relish somebody serving their devotees much more than somebody directly serving them, disregarding the service of their devotees. We've heard and read so many stories, starting from Lakshmana and Sugriva to, if you check in different sampradaya, then Ramanujacharyas have a different unlimited number of stories where he kind of establishes that the service to devotees is of paramount importance than just serving the Lord himself, kind of excluding the worship of the devotees. So with these two understanding, the basic understandings that that Supreme Personality of Godhead is Shri Radha Shyamsundar, and the worship and rendering service to their devotees is of much more pleasure giving to them. So with these two understanding, we kind of will take forward in this discussion that we're going to have. So as this verse says, it's kind of interesting of how this verse presents. It's in the beginning, the verse is kind of establishing it as a kind of standard truth that Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana. Many times it's like in PhD, we all have experience with some devotees, or when we are presenting some kind of logic to somebody, we first of all present what we are trying to present. Like in the case of PhD, you prepare all of your thing, and then you present it. And once you presented it, then you kind of give the supporting evidences of establishing why this is the case. So similarly, this verse is kind of in some ways, if you look at it that way, is kind of establishing that Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana. Once it says that, then it goes back and says, why is it that Srimad Bhagavatam is spotless Purana? Is Srimad Bhagavatam spotless Purana because of its amazing composition of literature, or is Srimad Bhagavatam a spotless Purana because it has these explanations of how the universe came into creation, how different energies of the Lord acts, or is Srimad Bhagavatam spotless Purana because of these amazing verses and amazing stories and amazing prayers that it has? But Srimad Bhagavatam interestingly says that Srimad Bhagavatam is spotless Purana because it is most dear to Vaishnavas, because it describes the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. And we might ask the question that, okay, what is it that the knowledge if I have to speak for myself, I'm not a Paramahamsa, so I don't even know and what is it referring to as the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. And like always, Srila Prabhupada is to our savior, as being our savior, actually comments on this line in one of the commentary that he gave on Srimad Bhagavad Gita, where he says that Srila Prabhupada expands on this, and then he says that Srimad Bhagavatam is all the devotees like Srimad Bhagavatam, as it says here. It is most dear to the Vaishnavas because it describes the pure and supreme knowledge to the Paramahamsas. Srila Prabhupada basically he's commenting on this verse as part of Bhagavad Gita. I think the verse is where the Lord is saying to Arjuna that all his devotees are kind of they relish discussing topics about his glories. So when as commenting to that verse, Srila Prabhupada comments that the devotees like this Srimad Bhagavatam, which is basically establishing as a narration of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord and the narration of pastimes of his pure devotees, because it is of being full of narrations about the relationship between the Supreme Lord and his devotees. So kind of combining, it's kind of an explanation of this, the statement that of describing the pure and supreme knowledge of the Paramahamsas. The supreme knowledge of Paramahamsas is nothing but their knowledge or their understanding of what is the relationship between that they have, or each of his devotees have, with the Supreme Lord. The knowledge of the relationship, which we in our Gaudiya we call it as Sambandha, the Sambandha knowledge is the Srimad Bhagavatam contains narrations and narrations and narrations of the Sambandha Gyan, which basically Srila Prabhupada translates here as full of narrations about the relationship between Supreme Lord and his devotees. So Srimad Bhagavatam, again going back, Srimad Bhagavatam is spotless Purana because it is describing about these wonderful narrations of relationship between the Supreme Lord and his devotees, and understanding our own nature of many times when somebody comes back and says that, hey, this is such an amazing product. These are the amazing things that it has. Like, for example, if somebody is just taking a mundane example, like let's say some of us like Apple products or any other products. We go and try to convince somebody, hey, this is such an amazing product. The first thing that comes to their mind is, okay, this could be amazing. This has wonderful things, but what is it for me? Srimad Bhagavatam, understanding our nature of having that selfish motivation, kind of presents this as this next thing. Once it has established that Srimad Bhagavatam is the spotless Purana, and then it has explained why is it spotless Purana, and then it goes back and says that this Srimad Bhagavatam reveals the means for becoming free from all material work, together with the process of transcendental knowledge, renunciation, and devotion. Anyone who seriously tries to understand Srimad Bhagavatam, who properly hears and chants it with devotion, becomes completely liberated. So the primary aspect of the discussion that we are going to have for the next 10 minutes or so is on this line. This Bhagavatam reveals the means for becoming free from all material work, together with the process of transcendental knowledge, renunciation, and devotion. So yes, so as this verse is saying, the Srimad Bhagavatam reveals the way for all of us. So we could, if we kind of look back in Srimad Bhagavatam, then yes, there are a lot of ways that Srimad Bhagavatam reveals the way of ultimately kind of going to that, which it is basically presenting the narrations of the connection between the relationship between the Supreme Lord and his devotees. And for us personally, it's also presenting the ways and the means for becoming free. So let's, for the next 10 minutes or so, as I said, we'll discuss about one aspect of how Srimad Bhagavatam presents it to us is through this kind of game. Going back to that is, so I think I'm kind of slowly missing the flow here, but yeah, just give me a minute. Yeah. So the presentation is again basically presenting in the same way of what we were discussing of wonderful gifts that it has done. So Srimad Bhagavatam kind of inspires us, is presenting to us the means, as we discussed in the last week's kind of, as I said, is continuation of the last week's presentation. Is one way that we could think is that it is it is revealing the means for becoming free by these presentations of these wonderful prayers that of various devotees that are in Srimad Bhagavatam. We could consider that as one of the ways. And the other way that we could think of is this amazing presentation of wonderful narrations of how the Supreme Lord, he's so magnanimous and he's so huge that he's creating this entire creation, which is even like no way kind of conceivable to our own mundane understanding. So that could be considered as one way. But if we kind of look further into deep, then in some ways, some of these requires a level of establishing faith and kind of sometimes feels inaccessible and inapproachable, that yeah, it's like for somebody going to kind of if we say that there are these wonderful glories and wonderful narrations of prayers that are there, then we could kind of maybe argue that yeah, it's there, but it's not something that I can kind of personally relate to. Like if you take the example of prayers of Queen Kunti, like prayers of Queen Kunti are wonderful and like such inspiring, but in some ways we kind of feel this a tinge of fear that, oh, what Srimati Kunti Maharani is praying is of such highest level that I cannot relate to that at my kind of my presentation, that I am there to the level of devotion that is kind of currently in my heart. But what Srimad Bhagavatam amazingly does is, amongst various other gifts that it has, including like within the presentation of glorification of the Lord, Srimad Bhagavatam amazingly presents the glorification of the devotees themselves. If you look kind of see that in if we just take the example of the first canto itself, in the first canto, the first chapter and the second chapter goes, and in fact the first and second chapter are kind of establishing the overall the narrative and the presentation of what Srimad Bhagavatam is, what like as it said, as the second verse is, what is Srimad Bhagavatam going to say, and then like various other things and overall. And then coming to the third chapter, that's when Sutta Goswami basically starts answering the questions of Saunaka Rishi and all the other sages. And then he goes back and presents all different incarnations of the Supreme Lord, and finally he says that out of all these incarnations, Krishna is the fountainhead of all this incarnation. And then he also presents some of the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam. And interestingly, from fourth chapter, we might think that, okay, Srimad Bhagavatam is kind of getting into the groove of presenting the glorification and presentation of various pastimes and narrations of the Supreme Lord and all of that. And we might think that, okay, now Sutta Goswami is going to go deep into where each of these presentation and narrations of every incarnation that he has kind of just touched upon in third chapter. But interestingly, in fourth chapter, it might appear in a conflicting way, the direction changes. the direction changes and then starts glorifying Narada Muni, and then it goes on glorifying Kunti Maharani, and then it goes on glorifying Bhishma Dev, and then Parikshit Maharaj, and then Sukadeva Goswami. It's as if like, yes, my ultimate goal is presenting the glorification of the Supreme Lord. But in presenting that glorification of the Supreme Lord, what I'm actually doing it's as Srimad Bhagavatam is saying that what I'm actually trying to do is presenting these glorification of devotees. And just taking some of the examples of the glorification of Lord that we have is when Saunaka Rishi is kind of asking the questions again in third canto, he goes on to says that there are various verses, but one of the verses that Saunaka Rishi, interestingly, is like third canto is already come there. Suta Goswami is narrating the pastimes, but then he goes back and then he says, "O Suta Goswami, all good fortune to you. Please narrate the activities of the Lord, which are all magnanimous and worth glorifying. What sort of devotee can be satiated by hearing the nectarian pastimes of the Lord?" So there are these wonderful um, verses which basically are glorifying the Lord and his pastimes. And in some ways, in answering to that, uh, before even Suta Goswami, Saunaka Rishi says that in the third canto, 19th chapter, Suta Goswami says this verse, where he says, "What to speak of hearing the pastimes of the Lord, whose chest is marked with Srivatsa? People may take transcendental pleasure even in hearing the works and deeds of his devotees, whose fame is immortal." So Suta Goswami is presenting that we might all think that we want to hear the glorification of the Lord, but what to even speak of glorification of the Lord? Just hearing the glorification of the works and the activities of the devotees himself will give you transcendental pleasure. So this is just one example of the verse that is there in the Bhagavatam, which is basically encouraging us to be enthusiastic and to just understand the glories of the Lord. Then we might think that, okay, it's there, but how is it that hearing the glorification of, we might say that, again, going back to the other point which we were discussing, yes, the presentation of the prayers of Kunti Maharani are wonderful, but maybe it is kind of, I don't feel so connected to that. We might say that, yeah, this is like the stories of Narada Muni, the stories of Dhruva Maharaj, the story of Prahlad Maharaj, the story of Vritrasura, and the story of Avanti Brahmana, and like so many other stories are there in Srimad Bhagavatam of in some ways, in most of these stories, if you look at Narada Muni, Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj, and in the case of Avanti Brahmana, there is no direct intervention of the Lord, like in the case of, or in the case of Bhishma Dev. It might appear that, yes, they are going through their own life stories and all of that, but ultimately the Lord is protecting. Is it the case with us? Like we might say that, what is it that I'm benefiting by hearing these narrations? How can I basically consider that this is a gift that Srimad Bhagavatam is giving to me of presenting the stories of the Supreme Lord, like the stories of the devotees of the Lord. How is Srimad Bhagavatam presenting to me or helping me understand the means of becoming free? The answer is going back to the original question, the original established fact that we had is of that understanding that the service to the Lord is in some ways subservient. The service to the Lord, excluding the service of the devotees, is in no way comparable to just the serving of the devotees with the proper understanding. Like in the case of Lakshmana and Sugriva, we understand that when Sugriva served Sri Ramachandra, he provided him a nice sitting place and all of that, but he completely disregarded and excluded Lakshmana from there. But what Hanumanji did was he immediately kind of intervened and then provided an amazing and wonderful sitting place for Lakshmana. And Ramachandra goes back and says that whatever happened for Sugriva with respect to the conflicting with like the fight that happened between Sugriva and Vali and like all the beating that he took was in some ways a kind of reaction for disregarding serving Lakshmana, who in this whole pastime is kind of presented as the spiritual master, or even if you look at it just from a devotee of the Lord, because Sugriva has disregarded the service, the service that he has rendered directly to Ramachandra was not pleasing to him. So in the same way, what Srimad Bhagavatam is doing is kind of in there's so many chapters are dedicated just to glorify various devotees. Is Srimad Bhagavatam is what it is doing is by presenting in that way, Srimad Bhagavatam is giving us a kind of access into their hearts and into their day-to-day activities. And interestingly, Srila Prabhupada, in reference to this verse, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, says that the subject matter found in Srimad Bhagavatam is meant for Paramahamsas. And we also hear in the second verse that Srimad Bhagavatam is relished by Nirmatsaranam Satam, that who doesn't have any tinge of envy in their heart relishes Srimad Bhagavatam. Then we might have this fear and apprehension that, oh, with that understanding, then Srimad Bhagavatam is no way presenting to me the gift of which I'm considering that these stories or anything are not at all gift for me, because it's kind of everything in Srimad Bhagavatam seems to be inaccessible. It's like many of us have this experience that if you have something valuable or something, let's say if a government has something valuable, what they do is kind of keep it as inaccessible for everyone. Otherwise, there's a fear of it losing its charm and value. So we might have this fear that Srimad Bhagavatam, if it is meant for Paramahamsas, then everything within Srimad Bhagavatam is inaccessible. But interestingly, Srimad Bhagavatam, through these narrations of devotees and presenting their glories, what Srimad Bhagavatam is revealing to us is making it if you take the example of Dhruva Maharaj. So it's by presenting the story of Dhruva Maharaj, what it is establishing is that you might be at this place where your heart is full of anger and of material emotions, like how Dhruva Maharaj started his journey of a little boy who is full of anger. But in his journey, what it establishes is that wherever you are, as long as you are taking shelter of Srimad Bhagavatam and of devotees, there's a way forward for you. Maybe we consider that, oh, the place that I'm born in and the family that I'm born in is of not great. Then it presents the story of Prahlad Maharaj. You might be born in a difficult and not so conducive place that you might consider, but there's a way forward for you. Then we might consider that, oh, I'm in a situation like Bhishma Dev, where I'm kind of in that conflicting situation. There is also a possibility for you to kind of move forward. We might consider that, like we might equate ourselves to Avanti Brahmana, where we are like, no, there's like I'm such a fallen person, like I don't have any good qualities. Then there is also a way forward, like in Avanti Brahmana. So irrespective of whichever category or aspect that we consider that we kind of are stuck in, Srimad Bhagavatam, through these narrations of these pastimes, is helping us presenting the way forward. And not just that, what Srimad Bhagavatam amazingly is doing is even though Srimad Bhagavatam is meant for Paramahamsas, by presenting these narrations and the glorifications of the Supreme Lord, and amazing and interestingly of the glorification of his devotees, what Srimad Bhagavatam is basically doing us is invoking that feeling of trust and love towards his devotees. And once that feeling of, oh, once like when we hear these narrations of Kunti Maharani and the amazing prayers that she has rendered, we feel, oh, she's presentation that she has done is such an amazing way. And then we feel some connection towards Kunti Maharani. We might feel some connection towards Narada Muni because of, interestingly, if you see that Narada Muni is like the de facto spiritual master that is available across Srimad Bhagavatam. Anybody who is in trouble, starting with Vyasadev, Mrugari, Dhruva Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, whoever is in trouble, like before Vritrasura, before Chitraketu Maharaj went on his journey of becoming a devotee and the whole Vritrasura pastime, Narada Muni was also there with Chitraketu Maharaj. So if you look at that way, Narada Muni is available across. So just the life and activities of Narada Muni will make us feel inspired and will make us feel connected towards his personality. And so by making these narrations of all these devotees, what Srimad Bhagavatam is kind of giving us is this in some ways that inaccessible fruit of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is basically described as available only for Paramahamsas, which is meant for Paramahamsas, as Srila Prabhupada is putting, by presenting these amazing fruits. This tree is the topmost, the intricate parts of the tree are not accessible for anybody, are meant for only certain devotees. But what Srimad Bhagavatam is also doing is that, yes, the deeper aspects of what I'm trying to present, you might not be able to appreciate it. But there is also a way forward for you, because just what you do is take any aspect that is available from me. There's amazing stories that are there. So take any of these stories and build that relationship and faith on these devotees. And once we are in that position of that, we have this amazing love and relationship that we are trying to establish with any of these devotees, may it be the four Kumaras, may it be Jay Vijaya, may it be anybody. Like there are um, more than the incarnations of the Lord that are in Srimad Bhagavatam. If we kind of count, there are, like, the number of devotees and their stories that are in Srimad Bhagavatam kind of in many ways outnumber the various incarnations or the presentations of various incarnations that are in Srimad Bhagavatam. So depending on our nature, kind of look towards that specific personality from Srimad Bhagavatam who will kind of inspire us in our journey. And that is an amazing gift of Srimad Bhagavatam. Maybe every other Srimad Bhagavatam, we might say that, oh, I don't relate to that aspect of Srimad Bhagavatam. I don't relate to the scholarly aspect of Srimad Bhagavatam. I don't relate to the presentation of the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. I don't relate to the Supreme Lord himself, the way he kind of acts in different ways. I don't relate to any of the gifts that Srimad Bhagavatam is there. But what Srimad Bhagavatam is doing is like in the mood of Krishna himself, that I will not leave you. You might not appreciate this aspect of me, but I will give you a fruit that is much more accessible. If you still say that this fruit is also not accessible for me, I'll give you another fruit which is much further down. If you say that this is also not accessible for me, I'm giving you these stories, and just hear them. And just by hearing them, you'll come to a point where you will start to appreciate and relish just these personalities. And once you are there, where you are appreciating just how wonderfully they have gone through their journey, and once it is there, then as Srimad Bhagavatam is presenting, that becomes just that, having that intricate appreciation of their own journey. We might not even appreciate saying that, oh, the journey of Avanti Brahmana is inspiring me to let go of everything. Just appreciating the journey of Avanti Brahmana, saying that, oh, what a wonderful personality that he is. Just appreciating Jay Vijaya, of their ability to let go of their free will and just be a kind of subservient to the wishes of the Supreme Lord. Whatever the Lord wants, we are just letting go of our free will, and then whatever gives pleasure to the Lord. Just appreciating that feeling of their ability of letting go of their free will, or in the case of Kunti Maharani, kind of letting her ability of kind of letting go of all material connections, and just saying that, may I always be in this situation of where I can all constantly remember you. And if for that I need to get a lot more troubles, then let me get a lot more troubles. Just us appreciating that aspect of Kunti Maharani, where she's kind of in that mood. Even we might not feel inspired to kind of follow in her footsteps, but just in that position of as in the case of, I'll just take this couple of minutes, just in the case of that happened with Haridas Thakur before he was beaten in 22 marketplaces, when he met all these devotees who were in the prison. What Haridas Thakur says is that, may you continue be in this situation. And all the devotees get startled. They say that, oh, we thought you are this merciful Vaishnava who is going to bless us, saying that let get out of this miserable situation of being in a prison. But what then Haridas Thakur goes on to explains that you are in the present situation that you are in is of this humble mood of appreciating a genuine Vaishnava for him, for being himself, for herself. And because you are in this humble mood of just appreciating a Vaishnava for his own qualities, just this mood needs to be carried on, and just the external situation of where you are doesn't matter. But as long as you are in that situation of where you are appreciating without envy just the qualities of this of the Lord, will make you eligible enough for attaining the Supreme Lord and his the relationship, and just the love of rendering love. So even for us, what Srimad Bhagavatam is, as Haridas Thakur is saying, is what Srimad Bhagavatam is doing for all of us is kind of presenting these stories and of kind of encouraging us. You just hear these stories and just appreciate these devotees for who they are. And once you're genuinely appreciating for who they are, not thinking that, oh, this is all these are stories or anything. Once you're in that position, once you're appreciating these devotees, just appreciating them will keep us in a situation where we'll be able to kind of access that mercy of the Supreme Lord. And just that accessing of the Supreme Lord, where we kind of call it as causeless mercy, just being in that situation of being able to access that causeless mercy will open a lot of doors. And that becomes the way for us to becoming ultimately free from all material work, and ultimately getting not just the transcendental knowledge, not just renunciation, but getting devotion, which basically is ultimately the gift of Srimad Bhagavatam. So just to kind of conclude, it's what Srimad Bhagavatam is doing is presenting various ways. And if you're kind of complaining all these ways are inaccessible, then it is presenting to us the most accessible way of just hear these stories of the devotees of the Lord. And by just hearing by these stories, all the doors that are required to be open to ultimately approach the Supreme Lord and render direct service to him in any way possible, by rendering service to his devotees, or in any way having that irrevocable devotion invoked in our heart, kind of starts through hearing these narrations of this of his devotees. So I'll end there. I'm sorry I took 5 minutes more than the scheduled time, but if there are any concerns or questions, we can discuss and then end. Yeah, I think we can end now. Thank you. I'm sorry there was, I think, slight disruption in between, but I hope I was able to present something that kind of helpful for all of us. And thank you once again for joining. We can end the class here. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyo evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo.